Valen's life always looked like one of those picture-perfect stories people whispered about at dinner parties, the kind that made others sigh with a mix of envy and admiration. Friends would glance at her and Lion as if they were living proof that fairy tales might actually grow up and become real. And Valen, with her calm smile and steady grace, believed that too, or at least tried to. She carried the weight of that belief like a warm shawl, comforting even when it slipped a little off her shoulders. Lion's world, his horses, his competitions, his effortless charm, wrapped around her like a soft echo she'd grown used to hearing. Everyone thought they were unshakable, and on most days, she let herself think so too. People often said Lion had a presence that filled a room before he even stepped into it. His passion for equestrian sports wasn't just a hobby, it was practically a performance of elegance and control that fascinated those around him. Valen admired that about him, the way he seemed born for the saddle, steady and focused. While she sat in the stands with pride swelling in her chest, she loved watching him ride. The calm in his posture, the fire in his eyes, the applause that always followed. And even when he came home late, smelling of dust and the open field, she welcomed him with a softness that had become her trademark. It never crossed her mind to question anything, because why would perfection need questioning? But sometimes, in the quiet moments, she sensed a thin veil between them, something almost invisible, yet undeniably there. A delayed answer, a distant look, a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Small things she brushed aside like dust on a windowsill, convinced they meant nothing. After all, every couple had off days, every marriage had its silent corners, and Valen, ever trusting, ever hopeful, filled those corners with excuses wrapped in love. If she noticed shadows, she simply chose to walk toward the light instead, because in her heart, she believed Lion was still the man she married, still the man worth believing in, at least for now, as the quiet edges of her world began to shift towards something she didn't yet see. Valen often woke before sunrise, padding softly across the chilled floor as the house still held the night's silence. She'd pause by the kitchen window, watching the sky stretch itself awake, thinking about all the tiny routines that made her life feel stable. That morning light always reminded her of her childhood, when she'd curl near her mother's lap and listen to stories about love that stayed firm no matter the storms. Those memories shaped the way she loved Lion, with a dedication that felt both tender and unshakable. Even now, when he seemed distracted or preoccupied, she told herself he was simply tired, pushing himself too hard at the stables. Her heart didn't want to consider anything else. Whenever they attended social dinners, Valen would notice the way people watched them, whispering affirmations that fed her belief in their bond. Women her age would lean closer to her, saying she was lucky that men like Lion didn't come around twice. Valen would smile, grateful and maybe a little nervous, as if she needed to protect that luck before someone else tried to touch it. She'd glance at Lion across the room, catching the confident sweep of his hand as he spoke about his next big equestrian presentation. Pride warmed her chest, even when a faint ache tugged beneath it, something she couldn't quite name. She pushed that feeling aside, telling herself she was imagining things, letting doubt creep where it didn't belong. Still, in rare moments when she was alone, she'd replay the tiny red flags she'd brushed off, a canceled date he'd forgotten to reschedule, a tone too sharp for a simple question, a scent she didn't recognize lingering on his jacket but dismissed as the stable's strong mix of hay and perfume-like grooming sprays. Each inconsistency flickered through her mind, brief and unsettling, but she refused to hold on to them. Trust, she believed, was the backbone of any marriage, and she clung to that belief like a promise she refused to break. And as Lion prepared for his upcoming equestrian presentation, the one everyone said would elevate his status even higher, Valen felt her faith in him stretch just a little thinner, almost like a thread ready to be tested in ways she never expected. On the morning of Lion's upcoming presentation, Valen found herself lingering by the stable fence, watching him train with an admiration that felt almost ceremonial. The rhythmic thud of hooves against the ground, the crisp air tinged with hay, the soft grunts of the horses, it all created a world she had learned to love because it was part of him. She remembered the early years when he'd guide her hand along a horse's mane, laughing gently as she hesitated, reminding her she didn't need courage, only trust. Those moments shaped the way she supported him, becoming the quiet anchor to his public brilliance. Yet, as she watched him now, something inside her fluttered uneasily, as if her heart sensed a shift long before her mind admitted it. She adjusted her scarf against the cool breeze, noticing how Lion interacted with people around him. His charm flowed effortlessly, especially toward his riding instructor, a woman Valen had always admired for her discipline and grace. The way they spoke, leaning just a little too closely, smiling with an ease Valen hadn't felt from him in weeks, sent a tiny pulse of discomfort through her chest. She told herself it was nothing, that familiarity in a sport like his was normal. Still, the air felt heavier, charged with something she didn't yet understand. She breathed slowly, steadying herself, reminding her heart that love didn't crumble over small moments, not if she refused to let it. When Lion rode past her, offering a quick wave and a distracted smile, she felt both warmed and chilled at once. His confidence radiated through every movement, feeding her pride in him, yet leaving a faint emptiness, as if she were applauding from behind an invisible wall. She touched the fence rail, grounding herself, telling her mind to be patient, to trust the man she'd built her life around. But beneath that reassurance, a quiet question began to form, a small whisper in the back of her thoughts that she wasn't ready to face. Not yet, because she still believed this life was solid, still believed Lion's world included her fully. At least she hoped so, unaware of how close she was to the moment that would change everything. Valen always trusted her routines, those steady rhythms that helped her feel grounded. Morning coffee, a quiet walk through the garden, the soft hum of the house waking up around her. But lately, those rhythms had begun to falter, shifting under the weight of things she couldn't quite name. Lion's schedule, once predictable as the sunrise, had started to twist in small but unsettling ways. He'd leave earlier than usual, return later, offer explanations that felt rehearsed. And while a part of her tried to brush it off as pressure from training, another part, deep, instinctive, almost maternal in its intuition, felt a tremor of doubt shaking through her chest. She didn't want to suspect him. She didn't want to become that woman. But something inside her whispered that she needed to pay attention. One afternoon, as she gathered laundry from their bedroom, a small detail snagged her attention, a phone buzzing on the nightstand, lighting up with a notification Lion clearly hadn't expected to leave behind. The name on the screen struck her like a sudden gust of cold air, one that made her hands freeze mid-motion. It wasn't the name of a friend, or a teammate, or even someone she vaguely recognized. It was the riding instructor, a woman she had trusted, admired, even defended when others suggested she was too close to Lion. Valen's heart thudded painfully as the message preview revealed words she wasn't prepared to see, soft phrases that didn't belong in a professional exchange. For a moment, the world around her dimmed, narrowing to that tiny glowing screen, and the ache growing in her chest. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone still trembling in her hand, as a wave of disbelief washed over her. Her throat tightened, breath shortening, like she was trying to inhale through broken glass. Memories flashed, Lion's late returns, the extra showers, the quick explanations that never invited questions. Suddenly, each moment aligned like pieces of a cruel picture she had avoided assembling. Tears threatened to fall, blurring everything, but she blinked them back, forcing herself to stay present, to feel the truth instead of running from it. She wasn't ready to confront him yet. She wasn't even ready to speak, but for the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a spark of anger, a spark of strength, pushing against the heartbreak she struggled to contain, hinting that this was only the beginning of something far more painful. Valen placed the phone down as if it were something fragile, something that might explode if handled too roughly. Her fingers tingled, her pulse raced, and she felt a strange hollowness expanding beneath her ribs. She stood up slowly, steadying herself, trying to keep the room from spinning. Every detail around her suddenly felt louder, the ticking clock, the rustle of curtains, even her own heartbeat thudding hard against her chest. She walked toward the window, trying to breathe, trying to understand how a life built on trust could fracture in a matter of seconds. The betrayal felt like a cold hand pressing against the back of her neck, chilling her all the way down to her spine. She didn't feel angry yet, not fully. She felt wounded, blindsided, and unbearably small. Still, part of her refused to accept what she had just seen. She began replaying conversations, searching for any sign she might have misinterpreted. Maybe the message meant something innocent. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe she was overreacting. But the truth weighed heavily against those fragile excuses, crushing them one by one. She remembered the instructor's warm smile, the way she praised Valen for supporting Lion. She remembered how safe she felt around her, how much she genuinely admired her discipline and kindness. That made the pain sharper, deeper, like a betrayal layered within another. It wasn't just Lion who had misled her. It was a woman she had trusted with her husband's passion, a woman welcomed into her life with open, unsuspecting arms. As the realization settled, Valen's vision blurred with tears she could no longer hold back. They fell hot and fast, trailing down her cheeks like a confession she had no choice but to make. She sank onto the edge of the bed again, gripping the sheets as if they could anchor her to something familiar. The humiliation felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves could see her heart break and silently judge her for not recognizing the truth sooner. She thought of all the times she had defended Lion's dedication, all the pride she had carried on her shoulders. Now, that pride felt like a weight pressing her down rather than lifting her up. And beneath the sorrow, something new began to stir. A slow burn of rage mixed with clarity, pushing her to face a reality she never imagined she'd have to confront. Valen wiped her face with the back of her hand, though the tears kept coming, steady and uncontrollable, as if years of blind trust were finally demanding release. She stood again, this time with a little more strength in her spine, and walked toward Lion's closet, searching for anything that could either soothe her panic or confirm it. A misplaced scarf, a second scent on his jackets, a note forgotten between pockets. Her fingers brushed over the smooth fabric of his shirts, familiar yet suddenly foreign, and for a moment she felt as though she were touching the remnants of a life already gone. When she reached the inner pocket of a riding coat, her hand froze. Inside was a small folded paper, worn at the edges, and the moment she opened it, her heart plunged. It was a handwritten reminder for a private lesson, one scheduled at a time he told her he'd been meeting sponsors. Her breath caught, not because of the lie itself, but because of the intimacy in the handwriting. It wasn't his. The realization settled over her like a shadow swallowing the last sliver of daylight. She pressed the note against her palm, feeling the sting of betrayal pulse through her veins. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stay upright, determined not to crumble again. She felt the anger grow sharper now, cutting through the fog of confusion with a clarity she hadn't felt earlier. She knew this wasn't just a meaningless secret. This was a choice, one he had made again and again, while she stood faithfully at his side, unaware she'd been cast as the fool in a story she never agreed to play. As the weight of everything crashed into her, Valen felt something fierce awaken in her chest, a strength born not from revenge, but from the need to reclaim her dignity. She took a deep breath, the kind that steadied her trembling body, and let the note fall onto the dresser. She wasn't ready to confront Lion yet, but she knew she couldn't keep pretending. Her heart ached, raw and exposed, but beneath that ache was a spark of resolve she hadn't realized she was capable of. She wasn't going to shrink or hide or swallow her pain. Not this time. Something inside her whispered that silence would only deepen the wound, and for the first time, she felt the early rhythm of a decision forming, one that would soon pull her toward a path she never imagined she'd take. The night after her discovery, Valen lay awake in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers she desperately needed. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling the same painful truths, weaving them into sharper shapes that stabbed at her chest. But somewhere between the hurt and the heaviness, a new thought began to surface, quiet at first, but persistent. She didn't want to hide what Lion had done. She didn't want to weather the storm behind closed doors, pretending nothing had changed. She wanted truth. She wanted accountability. And more than anything, she wanted to reclaim the parts of herself she had lost while trying to protect the illusion of a perfect marriage. As the idea took root, she sat up, feeling the crisp sheets slide around her legs. The bedroom looked different in that moment, almost unfamiliar, as though she were seeing it through the eyes of someone who finally understood she'd been living in half-light. She thought of Lion's upcoming equestrian presentation, the event he talked about endlessly, the one that would draw an influential crowd and place him in the spotlight he adored, the same spotlight he had used to shape their image, their reputation, their supposed harmony. And unexpectedly, the presentation became more than an event in her mind. It became an opportunity, a stage not just for him, but for the truth he'd tried to bury behind charming smiles and confident posture. Still, as bold as the thought was, Valen felt fear creep into her chest, tightening like a rope being slowly pulled. What would people say? Would they pity her? Blame her? Question her? She wrapped her arms around herself, not to hide, but to steady the tremor that ran through her body. Exposing Lion publicly wasn't something she'd ever imagined she could do, yet the more she considered it, the more it ignited a spark of courage she hadn't felt in years. A courage born from betrayal, but also from a deep, simmering need for self-respect. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, and realized that this decision, whatever shape it eventually took, would redefine her life. And she sensed, somewhere deep inside, that the path ahead would challenge her in ways she wasn't fully prepared for. As dawn crept in, Valen found herself walking through the quiet house, her fingers trailing over familiar objects that suddenly felt heavy with new meaning. The framed photos, the carefully polished trophies, even the soft hum of the refrigerator, everything reminded her of the life she had nurtured, the one she had believed in with unwavering devotion. She paused near the living room window, watching sunlight stretch across the floor, and for a moment she felt torn between two versions of herself. One was the loyal wife who stood proudly beside Lion, protecting his image. The other was the woman now standing alone in the early light, realizing she had every right to defend her own. That conflict tightened her chest, but it also made her breathe deeper, as if preparing for something she could no longer avoid. Later that afternoon, she reached out to a close friend, one of the few who knew her heart well enough to sense the tremors beneath her composed surface. They met at a small cafe, the kind that smelled of warm pastries and old memories, where Valen felt safe enough to let her mask slip. Her friend listened, eyes wide, hands wrapped gently around Valen's trembling fingers. There was shock, of course, and anger on Valen's behalf, but also hesitation, a soft warning that public exposure could unleash consequences she might not be ready for. Yet when Valen tried to imagine handling the betrayal quietly, the thought made her feel small and suffocated, as though she were shrinking herself to protect a man who had never protected her heart. Her friend saw that battle in her eyes and fell silent, knowing this was a decision Valen had to make alone. As they spoke, Valen felt her emotions swing like a pendulum, guilt pulling one way, empowerment pulling the other. The idea of ruining Lion's big event made her stomach twist, but the idea of staying silent tightened her throat even more. She felt the weight of every choice pressing down on her, each one shaping a future she couldn't yet see clearly. But as she walked home from the cafe, the crisp air cooling her heated skin, she sensed that her fear was slowly giving way to a quiet, determined strength. Something inside her whispered that truth had a right to be seen, even if it meant standing in the storm herself. And with each step she took, that whisper grew steadier, nudging her toward a decision that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. By evening, Valen found herself back at the stable, the familiar scent of hay and leather doing little to calm her restless thoughts. The arena, usually a place of admiration and pride, now felt charged with tension, as if it were holding its breath for what was about to unfold. She watched Lion move effortlessly among the horses, confident and unaware, his every motion practiced, precise, and public. Everything she had once loved about him now a backdrop for the truth she carried like a quiet storm inside her. Her heart pounded, alternating between dread and determination, and she realized that the path she was about to take wasn't just about exposure, it was about reclaiming herself from a life that had begun to feel like someone else's. She rehearsed the moment in her mind, each step of confrontation playing like a scene in a movie she couldn't pause. What would she say? How would she keep her voice steady while every eye turned to witness her decision? Her pulse quickened with both fear and an odd exhilaration. She wasn't used to thinking of herself as brave in the way this required, yet a quiet fire burned, stronger than the hurt, stronger than the doubt. Every glance she gave Lion in the arena felt like testing herself against an invisible boundary. Could she break it? Could she finally show the world the cracks that had been hidden beneath their perfect facade for so long? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, Valen felt a strange calm settle over her. She had no illusions about the chaos this would unleash. She could already imagine the whispers, the judgment, the public spectacle, but the weight in her chest had lightened, replaced by a raw clarity. This was her moment, her choice, her truth, and no one could take it from her. She walked slowly back to the house, mind racing but heart steady, aware that the coming day would test every ounce of courage she possessed. Somewhere deep down, she sensed that once she stepped onto that stage, Nothing would ever be the same again, and yet she felt ready to embrace it, uncertain of the outcome, but certain of herself. The day of the equestrian presentation arrived with a golden morning that seemed almost mocking in its brightness. Valen arrived early, taking in the bustling energy of the crowd, the crisp smell of freshly cut grass, and the soft clatter of hooves against the arena floor. Everything about the event, the elegant tents, the murmurs of anticipation, the carefully polished horses, felt magnified, charged with a kind of electric tension that matched the storm building inside her. She lingered near the stands, heart hammering, watching as Lion moved through his warm-ups with effortless grace, completely unaware of the turmoil swirling just beneath the surface of her calm exterior. Pride mingled uneasily with anger, creating a cocktail of emotions she could barely contain. The crowd began to swell, and whispers of excitement floated through the air like sparks. Valen noticed the admiring glances aimed at Lion, the polite nods from sponsors, the hushed compliments from old friends who had come to witness his skill. He smiled, confident, flawless in his element, the kind of presence that could silence a room with a single glance. And yet, as she watched him, she felt a strange detachment creeping in, a realization that the man everyone adored on this stage was the same man who had betrayed her in the quiet shadows of their home. The dissonance gnawed at her, sharp and relentless, fueling the fire that had been growing since the discovery of the messages, the notes, and the subtle betrayals that no longer seemed so subtle. Valen's fingers tightened around her notes, small pieces of evidence she had prepared, a tangible anchor to the courage she was cultivating. The arena seemed to hum around her, every cheer, every camera click, every whisper amplifying the stakes. She could feel the eyes of the world almost pressing against her skin, and somewhere inside, a quiet voice reminded her that this was no longer just about Lion. It was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, her sense of self. The air was thick with anticipation, and she felt a pulse of fear mixed with a dangerous exhilaration. The moment to act was drawing near, and she knew that once she stepped forward, there would be no turning back. As Lion prepared for his final routine, the crowd hushed in collective anticipation, the tension almost tangible in the warm air. Valen stepped closer to the edge of the stands, her heart hammering like a drum, the notes in her hand feeling heavier with every passing second. She watched him adjust his posture, guiding the horse with the precision of years of training, unaware that a storm was about to shatter the carefully constructed world around him. Each movement, each graceful command, made her stomach twist. Pride warred with fury, admiration with betrayal. The man she had loved, the man everyone praised, now stood at the center of her plan, the perfect target for the truth she could no longer contain. Her mind raced as she rehearsed the words, testing their weight, their timing, imagining the stunned silence and the ripple of whispers that would spread across the arena. The instructor was there too, standing at the sidelines with her usual poised smile, unaware that her reputation was about to collide with reality in a way no one could ignore. Valen's pulse quickened, not with fear alone, but with the intoxicating thrill of finally taking control of a story that had been hijacked from her. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, loud and insistent, urging her forward, reminding her that this was her moment, her stage, her reckoning. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to stretch her lungs to their limits, Valen rose, stepping into the aisle, letting her presence be felt before a single word escaped. The crowd's attention flickered, eyes turning toward her, murmurs weaving through the stands like wind through trees. Lion's confident gaze caught hers for the briefest moment, a flicker of recognition and confusion crossing his face, but it was too late for hesitation. She raised her voice, steady, cutting through the hum of the audience, and in that instant, the illusion that had cloaked their lives for years began to crack. The stage was no longer his alone. It belonged, in part, to her now, and to the truth she refused to keep hidden any longer. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled through the audience, some faces pale with shock, others frozen in disbelief. Lion froze mid-command, the horse pausing as if sensing the tension, his perfectly polished confidence crumbling before Valen's steady, unwavering eyes. The instructor's poised smile faltered, replaced by a flash of guilt and panic that gave Valen a fleeting sense of grim satisfaction. Whispers erupted into murmurs into startled chatter, and the air vibrated with the chaos of exposed secrets. It was messy, it was raw, and it was beautiful in its brutal honesty, a scene no one present would ever forget. Valen's chest heaved with a mix of triumph and disbelief, the adrenaline making her feel both alive and unmoored. She hadn't anticipated how sharply the weight of judgment, curiosity, and attention would press down on her. Yet, as she watched Lion's face shift from shock to shame, a strange satisfaction mingled with the remnants of hurt. She felt the power of her truth unfurling, a quiet liberation beneath the storm of eyes and voices, a reclamation of the self she had almost lost. And even in the chaos, she caught herself noticing small, intimate details, the quiver of his hands, the hitch in his breath, the subtle way the instructor avoided her gaze, that made the betrayal tangible in the physical world, not just her heart. The arena, once a place of admiration for Lion, had become a stage for revelation, and the spectacle carried consequences heavier than applause. Valen stood amidst the murmurs, sensing that nothing would ever be the same. Their lives, their reputations, even the air around them had shifted. Yet beneath the shock and tension, a quiet thread of something new began to weave itself through her chest, a fragile, exhilarating hint of freedom. She hadn't yet seen where it would lead, only that she had crossed a threshold, and whatever came next, the choice, finally, was hers. The echoes of gasps, whispers, and stunned silence lingered, carrying her forward into an uncertain but undeniable new chapter of life. The aftermath hit Valen like a tidal wave she hadn't quite anticipated. By morning, the story had spread through social circles, gossip threads, and social media feeds, each retelling sharpening the sting and amplifying the drama. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, some supportive, others judgmental, many tinged with curiosity that made her chest tighten. She felt the weight of every opinion pressing against her, a mixture of liberation and exposure that left her simultaneously exhilarated and drained. For the first time in months, she realized that the act of speaking her truth had set loose a chain of consequences she couldn't fully control. Yet somehow, that uncertainty thrilled her. Valen observed Lion from a distance, noting the way his composure had fractured under the public scrutiny. His anger was sharp, raw, flaring in his eyes, yet there was also shame, hesitant, half-hidden, slipping through the cracks of his proud facade. Apologies came, curt and awkward, or sometimes not at all, leaving her to navigate the tangled mess of emotions alone. The people closest to them, friends and family, offered varying reactions, some shielding her, others pulling back as if the scandal had made them complicit by association. Valen felt the dizzying push and pull of judgment and loyalty, a reminder that exposing truth carried both empowerment and isolation in equal measure. Yet beneath the chaos, a strange clarity began to form in her chest. For years, she had measured herself against the expectations of others, trying to maintain appearances while suppressing her own pain. Now, stripped of illusion and pretense, she saw herself with unflinching honesty. The fear and guilt that had shadowed her decisions had not disappeared, but they had softened under the quiet strength she felt growing inside. Each wave of media attention, each whispered comment, became a reminder that she had chosen authenticity over comfort, truth over silence. And with that realization came a tentative sense of freedom, a feeling that perhaps, after all the heartbreak, she might finally step into a life defined not by betrayal, but by her own choices. Lion's attempts to regain control of the narrative only deepened Valen's sense of separation. His anger came in bursts, sharp words, tense silences, and fleeting confrontations that left her heart racing but resolute. She listened to him, but no longer felt the pull to defend, to excuse, or to soften his behavior. Each encounter was a test of her boundaries, a reminder that the man she had loved in trust was not the man she needed in truth. She began to see him not as a partner, but as someone whose choices had shaped her decisions for years, and whose reckoning would now unfold alongside her own. The betrayal, once raw and blinding, had transformed into a lens of clarity that helped her finally measure what she deserved. Friends and acquaintances offered counsel in varying degrees, some urging forgiveness, some warning her of public judgment, others simply standing silently, bearing witness to her courage. Their reactions reminded Valen that truth is rarely simple, and that speaking it comes with both allies and skeptics. She found herself reflecting more deeply on what had been lost, what could not be recovered, and what might yet be rebuilt. The contrast between her former pride in the marriage and the present reality, created a complex tapestry of emotions: grief, relief, anger, empowerment, and a surprising sense of release. It was a delicate, unsettling balance, but one she was determined to navigate on her own terms. In quiet moments, Valen pondered whether her actions had been worth the public exposure, the fractured relationships, and the relentless scrutiny. Yet beneath the question lingered a quiet certainty. She had chosen herself, chosen her dignity, and reclaimed a sense of agency she had long denied. Every encounter, every glance, every whispered word in her orbit reinforced the truth that freedom is often messy, painful, and uncomfortable, but ultimately invaluable. She felt the stirrings of new beginnings, a tentative hope that she could rebuild her life on foundations she controlled, shaped not by betrayal or pretense, but by self-respect, courage, and the quiet knowledge that she had finally spoken her truth. Valen stood at a crossroads, the remnants of her old life scattered behind her like autumn leaves, and the path ahead wide open yet uncertain. She thought of independence, of quiet mornings untouched by deception, of evenings where her choices were her own. The social chatter and lingering judgments no longer held power over her. What mattered now was the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the clarity of her own mind, and the freedom to shape the next chapter of her life. She realized that liberation wasn't a single triumphant act. It was a series of small decisions, each one reclaiming a piece of herself that had been overshadowed by another's lies. As she considered the possibilities, Valen felt the first hints of hope curling like sunlight through a storm. Healing, she knew, would be neither quick nor linear, but it would be real. She could pursue her passions, surround herself with those who truly cared, and nurture a life unbound by the past. Regret might linger. Whispers of doubt might return in fleeting moments, but they no longer held the power to define her. The choice she had made, to confront, to speak, to step into her truth, had reshaped not only her relationship with Lion, but also her relationship with herself. For the first time in years, she could see the horizon clearly, unclouded by illusions. With a steadying breath, Valen allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The storm had passed, leaving behind a space that was hers alone to inhabit, to explore, and to fill with life on her own terms. She didn't yet know all the paths she would take, or the people she would meet along the way, but she felt an unshakable certainty. She had emerged from the chaos stronger, wiser, and more attuned to her own heart than ever before. The world outside could still spin with gossip, judgment, and expectation, but inside, Valen had discovered something no betrayal could take away: the freedom to be herself, fully, unapologetically, and entirely alive.